In this film, we'll visit the town of Bamyan, Afghanistan, where the Taliban committed an act of outrageous vandalism by destroying gigantic 15 centuries old statues. My government warns its citizens to avoid all travel to Afghanistan due to the volatile security situation, terrorist attacks, ongoing armed conflict, the risk of kidnapping, arbitrary arrest, and the high crime rate. My government clings to using the old flag for Afghanistan rather than the new one. Bamyan is a city of some 100,000 people at an elevation of 8,400 feet or 2,250 meters. There is an airport but no civilian airline service, so it's a 110-mile or 180-kilometer drive from Kabul that takes about 6 hours in a truck. Our trip to Bamyan started in Kabul, an impressive city of some 5 million people that is set in a bowl surrounded by a ring of hills that have houses reaching up to their tops. For the long drive to Bamyan, we bought food from vendors that dot the streets. Afghanistan is poor, but it has an amazing variety of fruits and vegetables that are produced by its industrious farmers. For our lunch, we bought some tasty barbecued chicken from a charcoal-fueled barbecue alongside the road out of Kabul. The road out of Kabul towards Bamyan is lined with a plethora of roadside vendor stalls that sell food in the form of fruit, vegetables, meat, and drinks. The backbone of economic activity in Kabul is based on the large number of small vendors that are found everywhere in the city. It was fascinating to watch the never-ending parade of vendor stalls pass by as we drove out of Kabul. Kabul is dotted with checkpoints manned by Taliban who are equipped with U.S. Army kit and vehicles that were left behind when the U.S. military skedaddled from Afghanistan in 2021, leaving behind at least $7 billion of U.S. military hardware, including 78 aircraft, 40,000 military vehicles, and more than 300,000 weapons, apart from about 200,000 dead Afghans. It was distressing to see a small donkey laden with a heavy load of dirt. The donkey's back and legs were stretched to their max. It was truly a beast of burden. Outside of Kabul, we entered the land of golden sheep, where shepherds move their flocks along the narrow roads, creating mobile roadblocks. Kuchi nomadic herders are part of the Pashtuns, the dominant tribe in Afghanistan. The Kuchi are known for their traditional way of life centered around animal herding and seasonal migration. They traditionally move their livestock across the country in search of pasture land. The Kuchi have Afghan Arabi domesticated sheep raised both for their wool for carpets and for their meat. As well, they have donkeys and camels. Given that many of the hills along the road are brown, it was surprising when we drove through an area of green hills. We had to stop for evening prayers by our Taliban security detail. At the high point of our drive over the mountain pass, we reached the snow line, and in the distance, we could see a line of security posts for a Chinese copper and iron ore mine. These posts are required due to the tenuous security situation in the area. The drive through the mountains was beautiful, however, darkness was falling, so visibility was diminishing. The U.S. Army conducted hellborn assaults in the Bamyan Mountains during their 20-year-long U.S. war, as it unsuccessfully tried to pacify Afghanistan and defeat the Taliban. Finally, we passed through yet another Taliban checkpoint at the gate to Bamyan City as darkness fell. In the early morning, I visited the produce distribution activity beside the Bamyan River, where all manner of produce was being distributed to small vendors to stock up their stalls for the day. Produce was being washed in the Bamyan River, while upstream vendors were cleaning out animal intestines and animal skins in the river. Perhaps this was not the healthiest procedure. The vendors wheeled the produce in wheelbarrows across the river to the Bamyan Bazaar. In the distance, overlooking Bamyan, were the snow-covered Hindu Kush Mountains. I met a distinguished old Afghan who told me about an attack that occurred in May 2024 when a gunman from the terrorist group Daesh, also known as ISIS-K, shot and killed 3 Spanish tourists and their guide in the Bamyan Bazaar. Another 4 foreigners in the tourist group were wounded in the attack. Following the attack, ISIS-K said in a statement on its Telegram channel that its fighters shot at Christian tourists and their Shiite companions with machine guns. The bazaar was full of interesting sights, such as the vibrant colors of the spice stall. The Massachusetts license plate was quite surprising, but the driver explained to me that it's perfectly legal as long as an Afghan license is displayed somewhere on the back of the vehicle, which it was. The globe in the traffic circle was ironic since the Taliban government is not formally recognized as the legitimate government by most of the global community. At odds with our government's dire warnings, I found Afghanistan full of friendly people and interesting sights for the curious traveler. These tinkers in Bamyan were happy to have me film them practicing their ancient trade of repairing pots and pans. The tinkers were working out of a small hut repairing a samovar. First, the tinkers restored the samovar's shape by hammering. To reseal the samovar seams using solder, the tinkers started a small wood-fueled fire to heat up the soldering iron. Air for the fire was increased using a small fan that was spun by an old bicycle wheel. In an impoverished country such as Afghanistan, this type of repair work is vital for the populace. It was sobering to see these tinkers renewing the time-worn samovar, since in my part of the world, we junk the old one and simply order overnight delivery of a Chinese-made replacement one from Amazon. Women were a fairly rare sighting in Bamyan, and when spotted, the older ones were well covered up. Just outside of Bamyan is a farm field in which are scattered Soviet armored vehicles that were either disabled or abandoned in the Soviet war in Afghanistan in the 1980s. They are collected there as a tourist attraction. One of the T-54 tanks has been painted in an outrageous polka dot pattern. This paint scheme mocks those killed in the war. Soviets used thousands of tanks and other armored vehicles during their war against the Mujahideen, the predecessors of the Taliban. However, the terrain was not generally favorable to armored operations. The countryside is being extensively farmed by farmers, mostly using farming techniques little changed since the time of the pharaohs. There are few if any tractors, so most of the plowing is performed by oxen, which are followed up either by hand planting or broadcasting seeds. Just outside of Bamyan is Shoregokola, also known as the City of Screams. Gokola was an important town on the Silk Road. In 1221 AD, during the siege of Bamyan by the Mongols, a favorite grandson of Genghis Khan was killed in a battle by an arrow shot from the besieged citadel, which led Genghis to massacre the population of the town, hence the origin of the town's moniker, the City of Screams. From the citadel, the view south to the Hindu Kush Mountains is beautiful. Bamyan has an airport, but currently the airport is not open for civilian use. From the citadel, the view north is towards the cliff where the giant Buddhas stood for 1,500 years before the intolerant Muslim Taliban blew them up in an act of incomprehensible vandalism. The monumental Buddha statues of Bamyan were built in the 6th century AD when Buddhism was the predominant faith in the area. The larger 55-meter or 180-foot tall Western Buddha was named Selsel, meaning the light that shines through the universe, and was referred to as male, while the smaller Eastern Buddha was called Shah Mama, meaning Queen Mother, and was considered by some as a female figure. When the Muslims came to rule Afghanistan, they viewed the Buddha statues as idols, so they removed their faces in the 9th century AD. However, they left the faceless statues standing in their niches. In 2001, the Muslim Taliban declared the 6th century Buddhas were blasphemous under Islam. Using explosives, they destroyed them in an act of outrageous vandalism. During the 20 years of the U.S. war in Afghanistan, soldiers liked to visit Bamyan to have a photo taken in front of the empty niches. Today it is very ironic to have to pay Taliban officials for a ticket to visit the site of the destruction of the Buddhas, considering the fact that the Taliban are the people who destroyed them. It is startling to realize that Afghan women are noticeably missing from many scenes, while males are seen in abundance. At the empty niche of the Eastern Buddha, I talked to a female Afghan doctor from southern Afghanistan who explained that the Taliban denied her entry to see the remains of the Western Buddha, so she was forced to sneak around to enter the site of the smaller Eastern Buddha. Of course, as females are now denied schooling past grade 6, she would no longer be able to become a doctor. Unlike the other two large standing Buddha statues, the central Buddha is in a seated position, so is significantly shorter, but it too was blown to smithereens by the Taliban. Like the other two huge Buddha statues, the Eastern Buddha statue was carved into a cliff face, but unlike them, the niche where it stood is still accessible. Inside the niche, there are staircases that lead to the top of the area where the Buddha's head was located. The cliffs are riddled with caves that were carved for use by Buddhist monks. Some of the caves contain remnants of wall and ceiling paintings, but many of these painted surfaces have been vandalized. The passageway consists of steep stairs with modern handrails made of rebar. There were several Afghan visitors who climbed up the steep passageway with us. Along the passageway to the top of the area where the Buddha's head was located, there were some monk cells and windows with beautiful views out over the countryside. After a steep climb, we arrived at the top of the niche, where we were some 30 meters or 125 feet above the level of where the feet used to be. From this location, we had a wonderful view out over the countryside with the Hindu Kush Mountains in the distance. At the top, several of the Afghan visitors wanted pictures with me as they were surprised to encounter foreigners. Our visit to the site of this outrageous act of Taliban vandalism was complete, and it was time to reflect on how anyone could be so intolerant of the existence of statues that had stood for some 1500 years before they arrived on the scene. Perhaps in a similar vein, a future group will erase all traces of the Taliban's existence. Darul-e-Ajdaha, or the Valley of the Dragon, is a natural landmark located about 7 kilometers west of Bamyan. It is a spine of volcanic rock rising from the valley floor, which locals once believed to be the petrified remains of a dragon. Legend says a dragon terrorized the area until Ali, the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, slew it with his sword by splitting the dragon in two and thereby converting the residents to Islam. Geologically, the dragon's body is a ridge of volcanic rock that was probably split in two by an ancient earthquake. Our armed Taliban security detail enjoyed the walk to the dragon's head, and once there they took photos, presumably for their Instagram accounts. There is a cold water spring flowing from one of the horns on the dragon's head. Walking along the dragon's back is a popular activity for visitors to Bamyan. There's a beautiful view from the back of the dragon out over the valley below, with the snow-covered Hindu Kush mountains in the distance. Passing through a Taliban checkpoint that bristled with kit abandoned by the U.S. Army, we drove to the easternmost point of the Bamyan Valley, to the ruins of Shah-e-Zuhak. Shah-e-Zuhak, or the Red City, is a historic city ruins which was once home to 3,000 people. It sits on a cliffside high above lush farmland. It was important as the Silk Road passed beneath it. The fortress's protective ramparts were surprisingly difficult to spot as they almost perfectly blend into the red cliff. The fortress is believed to have been founded between 500 and 600 AD, around the same time as the Buddhas of Bamyan were carved into the rock in the Bamyan Valley. The fortress was ransacked by Genghis Khan and his Mongols during the siege of Bamyan in 1221 AD. Unfortunately, due to prolonged exposure and a lack of conservation, exacerbated by recent periods of war, many of the structures on the site have collapsed or are prone to collapse. The purpose of the walk the plank feature on the walls was unknown. To reach the citadel located on the topmost part of the hill where a Taliban flag now flutters, one must descend past more watchtowers and walls, and through a tunnel. Unfortunately for the defenders, these defensive measures did not stop the Mongols from sacking the city. Approaching the citadel, we heard gunshots as the accompanying Taliban security detail decided that it would be a good place to fire off their assault rifles. This unexplained shooting caused the tension to increase needlessly. Near the citadel there was a wonderful view into a rugged red canyon and out over the lush Bamyan Valley. My visit to Bamyan was bittersweet. The beauty of the area was offset by the outrageous act of vandalism by the Taliban that senselessly destroyed a major human achievement. Statues that awed people for 1,500 years were gone in an instant. Who will remember the Taliban in 100 years, let alone 1,500 years? If you enjoyed this film, please subscribe and like. There are many more similar films available on my channel.